Yeah, good day and thank you for joining us today. So, day three of the talk by His Holiness Gurudev Shri Shri Ravi Shankar Ji on You and the Universe was mainly about meditation on a chant called Satyam Param Dhimahi. So, after the satsang on Sunday, the chant began with Satyam Param Dhimahi. So, let's discuss about what the mantra and the chant means, and let's discuss now. So, Gurudev began day three with the chant Satyam Param Dhimahi. What does this mantra truly signify in the spiritual and practical sense? Therefore, the mantra Satyam Param Dhimahi translates to I uphold the supreme truth in my awareness. It is not just a phrase, it is an invocation for our intellect to merge with the divine truth. Gurudev explained that Satyam is the eternal reality, Param means beyond duality, and Dhimahi refers to holding or meditating upon it. When we chant this mantra, we align our awareness with the highest consciousness, transcending the clutter of worldly thoughts. This chant purifies the intellect much like how light clears darkness. It guides the intellect from division to unity, from confusion to clarity, from chaos to calm. Gurudev's emphasis was that the purpose of this mantra is not just repetition but realization, to feel the oneness of the universe reflected within. It becomes a meditation where truth vibrates through every cell, reminding us that the self and the universe are not separate but the same eternal existence. Now, Gurudev mentioned that the intellect divides the world yet can also unite it. How do we understand this dual function of the intellect? Together, it's a profound insight. The intellect's natural tendency is to analyze and categorize. This analytical nature helps in scientific understanding, but when unchecked, it separates reality, mine and yours, good and bad, right and wrong. Gurudev explained that this same intellect, when soaked in divinity and guided by awareness, becomes a bridge rather than a barrier. When the intellect dwells on mundane objects and subjects, it fragments. When it dwells on knowledge, it harmonizes. The shift happens when awareness arises above ego and judgment. Then intellect becomes a tool of wisdom rather than conflict. The Vedic Dhammasasthan often teaches this through yagyas and japa, where focus and surrender purify thought. Gurudev reminded us that the intellect is like a lens. If clouded, it distorts. If clean, it reveals truth. Through meditation and chanting Satyam Param Dhimahi, the intellect returns to its pure state, realizing that all distinctions are superficial and only the eternal unity remains. Now, Gurudev said, whether you complain, compose a poem, or speak knowledge, you are a witness to the flow. How should a seeker interpret this? That statement beautifully captures the essence of Sakshi Bhava, the witness consciousness. Gurudev emphasized that everything, whether joy or frustration, poetry or silence, is a flow of energy through the intellect. The problem begins when we identify ourselves with that flow, thinking, I am the complainer, or I am the poet. The truth is, we are merely witnesses. The intellect expresses, but the self observes. When you realize this, a deep detachment arises not out of indifference but out of freedom. Gurudev's wisdom reminds us that the same channel can emit either noise or music. What matters is the awareness that observes without judgment. When we pray, let wisdom, divinity, and truth flow through this intellect, we are aligning that flow with the higher frequency of consciousness. This is meditation in action, living life as a witness while allowing divine expression to manifest effortlessly. Now, the talk mentioned an exercise, give away your names. Why would Gurudev suggest something so unusual? It may sound playful, but it carries deep spiritual significance. Our name is amongst the strongest identifiers of ego. The moment someone calls our name, consciousness reacts either with pride, irritation, or attachment. Gurudev's exercise of giving everyone the same name, say Krishna or Chris, loosens that identification. When everyone is Krishna, the boundary between you and me fades. The intellect loses its grip over individuality, allowing the deeper sense of oneness to surface. In many ancient Gurukulas, similar practices were used to dissolve personal identity and strengthen collective awareness. As Gurudev said, once you can let go of your name, you taste freedom, freedom from psychological labels. This exercise is both fun and transformative, turning satsang into a living laboratory of spiritual evolution where individuality merges into universality. Now, how does chanting Satyam Param Dhimahi influence one's meditative experience and meditation experience? The chants acts as a key to silence. Gurudev's sessions often begin with such mantras because sound carries vibration and vibration influences consciousness. When we chant Satyam Param Dhimahi, the mind slowly withdraws from external chatter. The mantra anchors awareness to the transcendental self, the ultimate truth. In that silence, intellect ceases to divide. It simply rests. Meditation becomes effortless. Chanting also balances the nervous system and synchronizes both hemispheres of the brain. In Vedic practice, this is called Nada Upasana, worship through sound. The mantras is resonance purifies subtle energy channels or nadis, preparing one for deep meditation. Gurudev often said the sound dissolves into silence and that silence reveals the truth. The chant is thus both a doorway and a destination, a rhythmic leading consciousness from the periphery to the core, where truth alone shines as a Satyam Param. Now, Gurudev said it is the intellect that divides the world, and the same intellect can bring it together. How can one practically transform a divisive intellect into a unifying one? Gurudev's insight reveals that the intellect is not inherently a problem. It's how we use it that matters. The divisive intellect operates from conditioning, comparison, and ego. It labels everything as mine or not mine, creating separation. To transform it, Gurudev guides us to infuse it with viveka or discrimination and bhakti or devotion. When the intellect turns inward through self inquiry, who am I? And upward through devotion, thy will be done. It sharpens, its sharpness becomes a light rather than a knife. Daily practices like Sudarshan Kriya, meditation, chanting, and satsang help dissolve the rigidity of intellect. In Vedic Dhamma we emphasize that the intellect should be purified through sacred study, that is swadhyaya, humility or vinaya, and service or seva. Once intellect aligns with the heart, it begins to perceive unity even in diversity. Gurudev says, let your intellect be soaked in love. When that happens, the same faculty that once caused division becomes the medium through which one perceives the divine in all beings. Now, Gurudev spoke about spontaneity, how even complaints or poetry arise as spontaneous flow. How does this spontaneity relate to the nature of consciousness? The consciousness is spontaneous by its very nature. It is not mechanical or pre-planned. It simply flows. Gurudev often says that life is a combination of spontaneity and structure. Complaints, creativity, or knowledge all are expressions of the same consciousness, passing through different filters of the intellect. The key, he says, is to recognize the witness behind the flow. When we complain unconsciously, we strengthen egoic patterns. But when we observe even the complaint as part of the cosmic play, we transcend it. This understanding transforms negativity into awareness. Gurudev compares this to a river, whether it flows gently or turbulently, the riverbed remains the same. Consciousness is the riverbed, that riverbed, unmoved by yet allowing the flow. In meditation, when we stop resisting spontaneity, the mind relaxes and the deeper wisdom of the self starts manifesting. That's when poetry becomes prayer, speech becomes silence, and every action becomes an expression of the divine. Now, why did Gurudev emphasize being a witness to the flow rather than trying to control it? Because control creates conflict while witnessing creates freedom. Gurudev teaches that when we try to control every thought or expression, we move further from our nature. Control is born from fear, the fear of losing identity or image. Witnessing, however, is rooted in awareness. When you watch the flow of thoughts, emotions, or words without judgment, the energy behind them transforms. This is Sakshi Bhava, the art of remaining centered amid movement. The Vedas describe it as Drashta Tattva, the seer principle. Gurudev reminds us you are not the wave, you are the ocean. The intellect is the wave, it rises and falls. The self is the ocean, still vast and infinite. By being a witness, you reclaim your true nature. Then, even when intellect produces noise, your awareness stays serene. In that state, truth flows effortlessly and life becomes a meditation in motion where doing and being become one human harmonious experience. Now, in this talk, Gurudev connects intellect with divinity. How can intellect become an instrument of the divine? Jayagurudev, the intellect becomes divine when it aligns with higher purpose and humility. Gurudev says, when you pray, let divinity flow through this intellect. This is profound because it shifts authorship. You stop thinking, I am the doer, and instead realize, I am the instrument. The Vedas call this nimitta bhava, the attitude of being an instrument of the divine will. When intellect is purified through meditation and selfless service, it no longer functions from egoic motives but from clarity and compassion. The knowledge doesn't divide, it illuminates. Gurudev encourages seekers to constantly invoke grace before speaking, writing, or acting so that the intellect becomes a channel for wisdom rather than vanity. The Vedic Dhamma practices this principle through rituals where each mantra begins with an invocation acknowledging that all power flows from the divine. A surrendered intellect becomes a sacred bridge between the finite and the infinite, between thought and truth. Now, what does it mean to uphold truth in awareness, as Gurudev describes in Satyam Param Dhimahi? To uphold truth in awareness means to live in remembrance of one's true nature, pure consciousness. It's not just about knowing truth intellectually, but embodying it moment to moment. Gurudev reminds us that Satyam is not just a concept, It is existence itself. When the intellect is constantly aligned with truth, every perception becomes sacred. In a practical life, it means being authentic, seeing beyond illusions, and remaining centered amidst change. Whether you are in joy or sorrow, success or failure, awareness of truth anchors us. This awareness transforms reactions into responses, chaos into calm. Gurudev often gives the example of the sky. Clouds may come and go, but the sky remains untouched. Satyam Param Dhimahi is a call to rest in that unchanging sky like awareness. It's a reminder that truth isn't somewhere else, it's within, waiting to be upheld by the light of her consciousness. Now, how does this teaching of Satyam Param Dhimahi align with the philosophy of non duality in Vedanta? That's perfectly aligned. In fact, it's the essence of Advaita Vedanta expressed in a few words. Satyam, the truth, is non dual. It exists beyond the dualities of good, bad, mine, yours, or joy or sorrow. Param signifies the supreme transcendent aspect of truth that pervades everything. Dhimahi invites the practitioner to hold this awareness within. Gurudev's explanation resonates with the Upanishadic declaration, Ekam Eva Adhivityam. There is one without a second. When intellect operates in separation, duality arises, but when intellect rests in awareness, it experiences oneness. Gurudev brings ancient Vedantic wisdom into lived experience through meditation, seva, and self awareness. When we chant Satyam Param Dhimai with feeling, the boundaries between subject and object dissolve. There remains only pure existence, Sat, pure consciousness, Chit, and bliss and Ananda. The mantra becomes a bridge from knowledge to realization, from philosophy to direct experience. Now, many people find it hard to let go of the name. Why does the attachment to name run so deep? Because the name is the first imprint of identity on consciousness. From childhood, we respond to it thousands of times. It becomes the anchor for ego. When Gurudev asks us to give away our name, he is not dismissing individuality but pointing beyond it. In Vedic psychology, nama or name and rupa or form are two aspects of Maya, the illusion that hides our infinite nature. By loosening attachment to Nama, we begin to perceive the vastness beyond form. It's a subtle but liberating shift. Initially, it may feel strange or even uncomfortable because ego resists anonymity, but as one practices it in satsang, calling everyone by one name like Krishna or Radha, the mind relaxes into unity. The constant reference to I dissolves. Gurudev's playful approach hides profound wisdom. When the name dissolves, the self shines. You stop identifying with labels and start identifying with the eternal silence that is nameless, formless, and infinite. Now, Gurudev often connects chanting and meditation. How does the mantra Satyam Param Dhimahi serve as a bridge between sound and silence? Gurudev beautifully explains that the purpose of any mantra is to take you from sound to silence. Satyam Param Dhimahi begins as a vibration, audible, rhythmic, and sacred, and ends in stiffness, the natural state of consciousness. The sound purifies the intellect, the silence reveals the self. In the Vedic tradition, this is called Nada Yoga, union through sound. When the mind is filled with noise, chanting brings focus. When the focus deepens, the sound itself dissolves into the vast quiet within. That quiet is the truth or the Satyam Param. Gurudev often said, mantra is the board, silence is the shore. Through repeated chanting, our awareness shifts from external activity to inner peace. Even scientists note that rhythmic chanting synchronizes brain waves and induces coherence in the nervous system. Thus, the mantra isn't mere repetition, it's energy aligning with consciousness. When we chant Satyam Param Dhimahi with devotion, the intellect melts into the heart and the sound becomes the fragrance of silence. Now, Gurudev said that intellect, when soaked in divinity, unites existence. How can one soak the intellect in divinity in day to day life? Gurudev, soaking the intellect in divinity means immersing it in remembrance of the sacred. Gurudev emphasized that this is not a ritual but a way of being. It begins by infusing divine values like compassion, truth, humility into daily thought and decision making. Instead of letting intellect serve ego, we let it serve awareness. In practical terms, start the day with a few minutes of silence, offer gratitude before meals, reflect on impermanence, and engage in selfless service. These simple acts keep intellect humble. The Vedic Sansthan teaches that divinity enters the intellect through satsang, the company of truth, the sadhana, or the spiritual practice, and seva, or the selfless service. Gurudev says, a sharp intellect is a blessing, a soaked intellect is a boon. The sharpness allows clarity, but soaking ensures softness, compassion, and connectedness. When intellect vibrates with divinity, life stops being a competition and becomes a celebration of unity. Now, what is the connection between intellect and ego according to Gurudev's teaching on Satyam Param Dhimahi? Gurudev often draws a fine distinction. Intellect or buddhi is a tool, while ego or ahamkara is an identification. When intellect serves ego, it divides. When it serves awareness, it liberates. Ego says, I know, while true intellect says, I seek. The mantra Satyam Param Dhimahi reorients the intellect toward the higher self, dissolving the ego's grip. Gurudev reminds us that intellect without humility becomes arrogance. Humility without intellect becomes weakness. Balance lies in recognizing that wisdom flows through us, not from us. During meditation, ego temporarily dissolves and intellect becomes silent. That silence is divine intelligence far beyond logic. In the Vedic system, this is known as Buddhi Yoga, mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, where intellect united with the divine guides one to liberation. When the intellect becomes pure, the ego naturally bows. The prayer then becomes not may I shine, but may truth shine through me. Now, Gurudev spoke about letting wisdom and truth flow through the intellect. How can one cultivate that flow? To allow wisdom to flow, one must create inner stillness. Gurudev said, wisdom cannot flow through a cluttered intellect. The mind must be quiet, the heart open, and the ego relaxed. This happens through consistent practice of meditation and devotion. When the intellect stops over analyzing and starts listening, intuition awakens. Gurudev calls this pragya, the higher intelligence that operates spontaneously. In daily life, one can cultivate this by observing silence or mauna, reading sacred texts, and serving without expectation. In Vedic Dhamma before every discourse, we recite invocations to Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, to remind ourselves that intellect is merely a vessel. The more we surrender, the more wisdom flows. Gurudev beautifully summarized, let the intellect be like a flute empty within, so that divine music can pass through. That emptiness is not lack, it is readiness to receive the infinite. Now, how does meditation complement the intellectual understanding of Satyam Param Dhimahi? Intellectual understanding gives direction, meditation gives experience. Gurudev emphasized that the truth cannot be known through thought, it must be felt through silence. The Satyam Param Dhimahi invites the intellect to bow to the transcendental self, but meditation allows us to merge with it. Understanding prepares the soil, meditation plants the seed. During meditation, the boundaries of the intellect dissolve. There is no thinker, no observer, only awareness. Gurudev often compared the intellect to a mirror. When it is dusty with concepts, reflection is distorted, meditation cleanses it. The mantra Dhimai itself means we hold in meditation. This chanting and meditating are not two separate acts, they are two wings of the same bird. When intellect and meditation unite, knowledge becomes wisdom and understanding becomes direct realization. Then Satyam Param Dhimahi is no longer just chanted, it becomes your very state of being. Now, the practice of giving everyone the same name seems symbolic. What transformation does it bring at the psychological level? This exercise dismantles the layers of conditioned identity. Psychologically, a name represents self image, history, and emotional memory. Every time it is spoken, it triggers association, praise, blame, status. By sharing the same name with others, these associations lose hold. The ego, deprived of its favorite label, starts dissolving. Gurudev's brilliance lies in using playful techniques for profound transformation. As participants address each other by one name, they begin to see beyond the surface personality and recognize the same consciousness as in all. It subtly cultivates Advaita Bhava, a sense of oneness. In psychology, this is called de identification, but Gurudev elevates it into spirituality. You realize that names are merely vibrations, the self is nameless. Many in satsang have shared that after a few days of this practice, interactions become lighter, judgment reduces, and laughter increase. When the me softens, love flows naturally, and that is true freedom. Now, as Gurudev often says, truth is not to be spoken, it is to be lived. How does the Satyam Param Dhimahi guide one toward living truth? Gurudev, living truth means aligning thought, word, and action with the awareness of oneness. Gurudev teaches that truth isn't about opinions or rigid principles. It's the natural expression of a clear consciousness. When we meditate on Satyam Param Dhimahi, truth becomes an inner compass rather than an external truth and rule. It manifests as authenticity, compassion, and courage. For example, when you speak truth about from ego, it hurts. When you speak from awareness, it heals. Gurudev says, truth without love is harsh, love without truth is shallow. The mantra integrates both the Dhimahi aspect. The meditative holding ensures that truth isn't reactive but reflective. Vedic Dhamma practitioners often meditate on this mantra before rituals, ensuring purity of intention. When one lives from that awareness, even silence becomes eloquent. Then truth is no longer a practice, it becomes one's nature, spontaneous and radiant like sunlight. Now, Gurudev mentioned that intellect, when engaged in mundane topics, starts dividing. Can you elaborate on how mundane discussions affect consciousness? Yes, mundane discussions, especially those driven by gossip, judgment, or negativity, scatter energy. Gurudev says, what you discuss, you become. When the intellect is constantly occupied with trivialities, it loses sensitivity to subtler realities. Energy drains, enthusiasm drops, and awareness narrows. The mind becomes restless, seeking stimulation rather than stillness. In contrast, when intellect contemplates knowledge, scriptures, or gratitude, it elevates consciousness. The Vedic Dhammasana encourages mindful speech or the Vakashuddhi. Before speaking, we ask, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Gurudev's teachings show that each word carries vibration. Mundane talk keeps the intellect earthbound. Wise reflection lifts it skyward. It's not about avoiding worldly talk, but bringing awareness into it. When awareness is present, even a conversation about daily life becomes sacred. That is what Gurudev calls transforming the intellect from devotion to devotion. Now, Gurudev described that when the intellect discusses knowledge, it unites existence. How does the study or sharing of knowledge have such an effect? When intellect engages in knowledge, it moves from division to expansion. Knowledge here doesn't mean information, but jnana, awareness of the self. Gurudev explained that worldly discussions strengthen identity, while knowledge-oriented discussions dissolve it. When we share truth, our vibration changes. The intellect begins to resonate with the higher reality of oneness. This is why satsang, being in the company of truth, is transformative. The words may differ, but their essence unites hearts. In the Vedic Dhammasana, when Pandits and scriptures or conduct yagyas, the atmosphere becomes charged with coherence. That coherence affects everyone's consciousness. Gurudev said that when intellect speaks from awareness, it doesn't divide, it heals. Discussing knowledge opens the doors of subtle perception, allowing us to experience our interconnection with all beings. In that stage, communication becomes communion, and intellect becomes a mirror of the cosmic mind rather than a wall of individuality. Now, Gurudev often says, you are a witness to the flow. What is the practical significance of witnessing for a seeker in everyday life? Gurudev, witnessing or Sakshi Bhava is the cornerstone of spiritual maturity. Gurudev teaches that witnessing doesn't mean detachment from life but freedom amidst it. In daily life, situations arise anger, joy, fear, or confusion. Instead of identifying with them, simply watch them. I am feeling anger is witnessing. I am angry is identification. This small shift that changes everything. It turns reaction into reflection. Gurudev explained that the witness is untouched like the sky amidst passing clouds. Practicing witnessing in small moments like listening, breathing, walking deepens the inner silence. In Vedic tradition, witnessing is cultivated through meditation and awareness of the breath. When you stay as a witness, karma loses its grip and peace prevails. Gurudev says you cannot stop waves, but you can learn to surf. Witnessing is that surfboard. It keeps you balanced in the ocean of existence while allowing full participation in the play of life. Now, Gurudev connected intellect and divinity through the phrase, let wisdom flow through this intellect. How does this prayer influence that process? There is a prayer when heartfelt purifies the channel of intellect. Gurudev often describes prayer not as begging but as aligning. When you pray, let wisdom, divinity, and truth flow through this intellect, you surrender the egoic sense of authorship. The intellect stops claiming ownership and becomes receptive. Openness allows higher intelligence to function. The act of prayer refines emotions, making the heart soft and intellect clear. In Vedic dances and rituals, every act begins with sankalpa, a conscious intention offered to the divine. This reminds us that we are instruments, not doers. Gurudev said that such surrender invites grace. The moment we drop pride in my intellect, divine insight emerges effortlessly. Prayer shifts the vibration from effort to flow, from knowledge to wisdom. It transforms the intellect from a personal possession into a sacred conduit through which the universe expresses itself. Now, the talk emphasizes that we are witnesses, whether wisdom or garbage flow through the intellect. How should one deal with negative or unproductive thoughts? The Gurudev advises neither suppression nor indulgence, simply awareness. He says, let thoughts come and go, you remain the sky. Negative thoughts lose power when witnessed without resistance. The mistake is identifying with them. When intellect is purified by meditation, it stops giving energy to every passing action and notion. Gurudev also suggests channeling that energy creatively through seva, music, writing, or laughter. At the Sri Sri Gurukul, students are taught to transform rajas or restless energy into sattva or clarity by observing and redirecting. Vedic Dhammasana teaches mantra chanting and breath awareness for this. When Satyam Param Dhimahi becomes a mental anchor, negativity dissolves in its vibration. The intellect regains its luminosity. Gurudev reminds us the sky doesn't mind clouds. It just allows them. Similarly, wisdom grows when we stop fighting the mind and start resting in awareness. How does the chanting of Satyam Param Dhimai differ from ordinary speech in its impact on consciousness? Ordinary speech arises from thought and emotion. Mantra arises from the level of vibration and consciousness. Gurudev teaches that every sound carries energy, but sacred sounds are structured to elevate awareness. Satyam Param Dhimahi is a Gayatri like invocation guiding intellect toward the supreme truth. Its rhythm, pronunciation, and intent to create resonance in subtle energy centers. When chanted with devotion, it harmonizes both hemispheres of the brain and calms the nervous system. Unlike normal conversation, this mantra transcends meaning, it tunes consciousness itself. In the Vedic Sansan, such mantras are chanted before meditations and yagyas to sanctify the mind. Gurudev says, words can heal or wound. Sacred sound does both. It removes what hurts and reveals what heals. The mantra's vibration dismantles habitual thinking, creating inner silence. Thus, it's not just a recitation, it's retuning the intellect to the frequency of the divine. Now, Gurudev's exercise of using one name for all seems symbolic of oneness. How can this practice help resolve social or cultural divisions? The beauty of Gurudev's approach lies in its simplicity. When everyone in a group shares one name, all distinctions, status, background, gender, religion lose importance. It is a microcosm of the ideal society the Vedas envision. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. This playful practice makes us experience equality, not just discuss it. At first, it feels humorous, later, it feels liberating. Participants stop labeling each other by profession or role and start seeing the breath beneath and the person beneath. Pure consciousness. Gurudev's brilliance is in using a small experiment to reveal a universal truth. Unity exists beneath identity. The Vedic Dhammasansan often incorporates such group exercises in satsangs and youth programs to cultivate inclusivity. When name based identity dissolves, love expands. We stop seeing others and begin experiencing us. As Gurudev says, when you forget your name, you remember yourself. That's the true social and spiritual revolution. Now, what is the relationship between the intellect and the heart and Gurudev's teachings on this topic? Gurudev often says a sharp intellect must rest on a soft heart. Intellect analyzes, the heart synthesizes. When intellect dominates without a heart, it divides. When the heart overrules intellect, it becomes blind. The balance of both leads to wisdom. Satyam Param Dhimahi unites them. Satyam is the clarity of intellect. Dhimahi is the meditation of the heart. Gurudev teaches that in deep meditation, intellect dissolves into feeling and feeling blossoms into understanding. In rituals of Vedic Dhamma every mantra is recited with devotion or bhava and precision or shuddhi. This balance mirrors Gurudev's principle. Science and spirituality must walk hand in hand. When intellect bows to love, it finds purpose. When love is guided by intellect, it gains direction. Together they create harmony, head and heart dancing in rhythm to the music of truth. How can one integrate this wisdom into a professional or everyday setting outside spiritual environments? Gurudev emphasizes that spirituality is not escape, it is enhancement. When intellect is aligned with Satyam Param Dhimahi, clarity and compassion guide every action, even in business or family life. In professional settings, this means making decisions from awareness, not anxiety. The mantra reminds us to uphold truth in every interaction. Gurudev's corporate programs teach breathing techniques and meditation to restore focus and empathy. The Vedic Dhamma trains priests and administrators alike to work without attachment, following Nishkam Karma, selfless action, whether managing a team, teaching, or parenting. When intellect stays soaked in truth, relationships flourish and stress dissolves. Gurudev says, don't leave the world to find peace. Bring peace into the world. Practicing Satyam Param Dhimahi silently during moments of tension centers the mind. Then intellect doesn't react, it responds with wisdom. That is living spirituality in motion. Now, what role does humility play in the transformation of intellect that Gurudev describes? Gurudev, humility is the fragrance of true wisdom. Gurudev often says, the sign of wisdom is simplicity. The intellect becomes divine only when it bows. Pride stifles the intellect, humility softens it. When intellect acknowledges its limits, grace begins to operate. Gurudev likens it to a cup. Only an empty cup can be filled. In Satyam Param Dhimahi, humility is implicit. We pray, let truth flow through me, not from me. This attitude keeps learning alive. In the Vedic Dhammasansan, before chanting or performing yagyas, even the most learned Pandit bows before the altar, symbolizing surrender. Humility connects knowledge with devotion, turning logic into light. Without humility, intellect becomes like a sword, sharp but dangerous. With humility, it becomes a lamp, gentle but illuminating. Gurudev reminds seekers, be like a flower, beautiful, fragrant, and always bowing toward the earth. Now, Gurudev mentioned that intellect can rediscover its true nature. What is that nature according to his teachings? The true nature of intellect is pure consciousness, non-dual, luminous, silent. Gurudev says the intellect is meant to reflect the infinite and not to imprison it. When freed from conditioning, it becomes transparent, allowing divine intelligence to shine through. In ordinary life, intellect identifies with individuality, but its deeper nature is universal. It's like a clear crystal that takes the color of whatever is near. When placed near divinity, it reflects the divine. Gurudev's teachings guide the intellect to rediscover this purity through meditation and knowledge. The Vedic Dhamma defines this as buddhi, shuddhi, purification of intellect, achieved through mantra, prayer, and selfless action. When intellect returns to its source, it realizes it was never separate from consciousness. It rediscovers itself as a Chaitanya, the living awareness that pervades everything. That discovery and rediscovery is liberation, and that state is what Gurudev calls Satyam Param Dhimahi, lived Jai Gurudev.